Hi, Bon. Welcome to 10-Minute Talks. I'm Harshadeva.
This week, I have the pleasure of speaking with Roland Bleiker, Professor of International Relations at the University of Queensland, Australia, and coordinator of the Visual Politics Research Program. His research explores how images and emotions shape political phenomena, including humanitarianism, security, peacebuilding, protest movements, and conflict. He is the author of several important books, including Visual Global Politics, Aesthetics and World Politics, and Popular Dissent, Human Agency and Global Politics, and he has contributed to many academic journal articles. He's currently leading a major interdisciplinary project on the politics and ethics of visualizing humanitarian crisis, working with organizations such as the World Fresh Food Foundation, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Australian Red Cross.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm curious, Professor, when people see images of humanitarian crisis through photos or films, how do those visuals shape empathy and influence real world responses?
Well, first to say is thank you so much for having me, Harsha. And please call me Roland. So, as you know, I'm located in Australia, and we are quite informal in Australia. So it's a great pleasure and privilege to be able to have a conversation with you in this format. Look, I mean, images of humanitarian crisis are a complex issue, and it's an issue that I'm currently investigating as part of a collaborative project on the ethics and the politics of how we visualize humanitarian crisis and why images are important. And I think the first thing to say is that simply images are extremely important in conveying the nature of crisis, but also in shaping responses. You know, the famous saying that an image is worth 1,000 words. It's just if we see something, you respond to it. If you see an image of a person suffering, it really affects us. And this is why humanitarian organizations have, or use images regularly and effectively in their campaign to draw attention to issues, but also to kind of gather support, including donations and financial support. At the same time, there's a wide recognition that images are political, but also often scholars say they can be quite problematic, images of crisis. Now, there's discussion, for instance, of what in the literature is called negativity bias, that we tend to focus on negative images, that the news especially often focuses on negative news, on poverty, on crisis, on war, and doesn't really enough portray the positive aspects of life, and that we sort of get a screwed version of reality. Lots of discussion on compassion fatigue, on how seeing images of suffering again and again makes people numb. There's people strongly disagreeing with that, but that's a body of knowledge. There's literature on, of course, poverty porn, a term that's often used to depict images of degrading images of victims in a passive situation, suffering. Like a mother and child is often portrayed in the situations of despair. People speak of the dehumanizing nature of these images, how they kind of don't really provide victims of a crisis with agency, with the ability to act. They're portrayed passively. And this is often seen as part of sort of a neo-colonial way of depicting crisis, that Western people come in, help local people, and there's a whole baggage of colonial values around that. So there's lots of literature that looks at the problems of how we depict crisis, but overcoming them isn't quite as easy, in the sense that humanitarian organizations know that basically people, they react positively to seeing someone in a situation of despair. If they see a suffering mother and child, people donate money. You know, they rally behind that image to support a humanitarian endeavor. If they see an active, happy person, people don't have the same kind of compassionate response. So part of what people are trying to do, including our project, is to figure out how we can develop more positive images that don't fall back into these problematic stereotypes. There's literature, for instance, on solutions journalism, so that images portray not problems, but they portray solutions and people actively pursuing solutions. The Australian Red Cross has made a move to what they call strengths-based photography. So they show people not as passive victims, unable to respond, but they try to portray people in crisis as being active, positive, and dealing with the issue, even though they do need help, that they're not portrayed as passive. So this is a long way of a rambling way of responding to your question, to say it's an interesting, important issue, but also quite complex, and it doesn't have easy solutions to it, but there's a lot of interesting work being done on offering more innovative and more culturally attuned, less colonial sort of ways of depicting crisis.
Thank you, Roland. My next question is, how does bringing art, literature, and aesthetic sensibility into thinking help us understand conflict and reconciliation in a way that traditional political analysis often misses?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's kind of a related question, but also quite different in the sense that images of humanitarian crisis are often media images. And when we look at art, of course, we look much beyond the media. We look at broader ways of depicting the world around us, including the world of conflict and efforts to solve it. And sort of my position there is to say that when we look at a conflict, we need to draw on all our resources to understand the conflict. We can't just use conventional social scientific means. And aesthetic means, literature, art often provides us with very insightful ways of looking at the world. I mean, take literature as an example. So, for instance, if you want to understand 19th century Russia, for instance, we probably find out more from Dostoevsky, from Tolstoy, than from reading a history book, because these novels provide us with rich insight into how life was like. They give us empathy into the different world. They depict the emotions. So literature can give us insights into whole life worlds that we otherwise wouldn't be able to grasp. Visual art, likewise, can give us insight into a conflict that's quite unique. We probably one of the most famous examples is Pablo Picasso's massive painting Guernica, which is one of the most powerful depictions of war. It sort of portrays the horrors of war through visual means in a way that words cannot really do it. And that's why it's become an icon of the anti kind of war movement, because it provides us, especially with insight into the emotional dimensions of war. That's something that aesthetics, literature, art can do. It can bring out emotions in a way that social science analysis cannot do. And if we want to look for innovative ways of solving conflicts, of having solutions to a conflict, then I think we really need to draw on the full spectrum of human intelligence, on this full spectrum of solutions and sources that are out there, insights that are out there. And aesthetics, literature, art, music, dance are all ways that many interesting scholars now are drawing on to offer conflict resolution insights.
Right, wonderful. Roland, you have spent many years researching and working on emotions, images, and conflict. Was there a particular moment, an image, a story, or an experience that significantly shaped how you understand peace or reconciliation?
That's a challenging question, and I'm not sure if I can identify sort of offhand a very particular moment, but I can give an example in the way that I feel I have always learned a lot from collaborating with other people, especially from people with people from different cultural contexts. One of the last essays I wrote, for instance, with my late wife, Emma Hutchison, was with two colleagues, with a Korean colleague, Hwang Young-ju, and with an Australian Indigenous colleague and a Torres Strait Islander colleague, Josephine Bourne. And we looked at how emotions and conflict resolutions are conceptualized and practiced in different cultural contexts. And it's fascinating to see, for instance, how in Korea, emotions have a very different sort of value place in society than in the West. In the West, traditionally, we have demonized emotions as being these individual, irrational things. Even in our language, we often say, don't be so emotional, act rationally, because emotions are considered bad. They're considered impulsive. They're not really rational. And Korea has an entire vocabulary in language, in concepts to recognize how emotions are actually a central part of conflicts. And often conflicts are about emotions. In the Western tradition, we try to take emotions out of conflict resolution and find sort of rational ways of reaching common ground. That's a traditional sort of conflict resolution mechanism in the West. And the Korean tradition actually recognizes emotions as being at the very core of conflict and then develops a variety of mechanisms through which we can work through these emotions as part of conflict resolution mechanisms. That's what I've worked with Hwang Young-ju, my Korean colleague, but Josephine Bourne as well. She talks about how in the Torres Strait, there's whole different local traditions that deal with the emotional dimensions of conflict in very intricate ways and in ways that recognize emotions as being a central part of our lives of conflict. So, yeah, when you ask me identifying a moment, I can see primarily working with wonderful colleagues from different parts of the world who have an exceptionally sophisticated understanding of the links between emotions and conflict and reconciliation that I find have been very enriching for me to be part of and to learn from.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight. It's been a really pleasure to having you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Harsha, for having me, and it's been such a pleasure. Thank you very much.